I'm Bocara Legendre. Join me and my guests, scholars and scientists, spiritual teachers and philosophers, as we explore the boundaries of religion and metaphysics, of science and spirituality. Join me and some really fascinating people as we try to figure out what life's all about and how it can have meaning for each one of us. Well, what's happening today is that I've invited Ram Dass and Huston Smith for lunch. And Ram Dass is a really good friend of mine. We got to know each other a few years ago. And Huston Smith, I really don't know at all, so that's extra fun. And these two guys have known each other since the 60s. And I want to ask them about when they met, so I'm not even going to mention that. And the interesting thing about them is that whereas Huston Smith is really an academic who has taken up a mystical life, Ram Dass is a mystic, just through and through. Ram Dass started out as a psychologist at Harvard, and he and Tim Leary did these experiments with LSD, and they both got thrown out of Harvard. But they were so important to Ram Dass that he went to India because he felt that on psychedelics he'd seen something really important. And he went and studied with a guru called Neem Kairoli Baba. And when he came back, he wrote Be Here Now, which became the absolutely seminal texts for young people growing up in the 60s. Since then, he's written a lot of books, lectures, teaching, all kinds of things. And he's recently written a book called Still Here, which is about aging and illness and how to cope with the difficult things of life as they come along. Interestingly enough, Huston Smith, who started out as a philosopher of religions and was really an academic, his first book sold thousands and thousands of copies, and it's still in print, and he wrote it 45 years ago. It was called The Religions of Man, and now it's called World Religions. And Huston is considered a scholar and an authority. But what's interesting about him is that he does a whole lot of different practices himself. Islam and Hinduism, Buddhism, although he's a professed Christian. Huston actually had a 5-part series made about him by Bill Moyers, and it was called The Wisdom of Faith. He's probably considered the world authority on religions. So often, people do interviews with these wise people, and so rarely do we see them able to talk together. And my whole desire with this program is not so much to interview as to let two people I love listening to have my audience have the chance to listen to them too. And that's really why I want to do it. You know, in one of Huston's books, he quotes Peter Berger as saying that the route towards civilization, or something like that, is through conversation. And that's really what I believe and what I hope for. So I think I'll turn this off so it isn't like dead food. We'll finish it up later. Because here's Ram Dass. I want to say hello. We maybe all have to help him get up the steps. It's so hard for him since his stroke. You did it. You know what? I'm really grateful. I'm on the floor. Thank you. Houston, if you will sit over there in that red chair, that side, that would be perfect.
What does it feel like to labor under this burden of people feeling sorry for you?
I know. But they're only feeling sorry for their projections. And I find that life is avoiding other people's projections.
Now I have to get this. Life involves avoiding other people's
projections. It's
Other
amazing. You go
people.
down the street and you see an old friend, hi Dick,
yeah.
and then somebody sees you and they come, oh my, oh, Ram Dass, I touch your feet, you know, and you're changing, they're each projecting on this screen.
That's very good.
You know, just before we came in here, you were talking about how much suffering there is and in the world. And one of the things I think you really both have to offer is, what today can you say to young people that gives them a perspective to deal with the world the way it is, so full of suffering?
Well, there are so many ways to answer that question. This is the plane of suffering, and we shouldn't be complaining about suffering because we asked for it.
By being incarnated?
Be incarnated, yeah. We as souls asked for it. We wanted to experience suffering. And for me, this plain experience of love and experience of suffering, two things. And the suffering is like sandpaper.
I want to really talk about that because I'm not totally convinced that suffering is the only way to God. For you and for me too, and from what Huston said, suffering has brought us closer to God. But don't you believe that joy and happiness can also bring you close?
My personality structure was such that I use suffering.
Oh, Ram Dass, you're Jewish.
Well, I thought that was the factor.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. And I thought, and because of my being a therapist and thing, I was always, people bring their suffering.
Yeah.
And I was suffering, and pretty soon, like the suffering with the stroke, it changed my perception of myself. It didn't just change my body. Mm-hmm. It changed my perception of myself. And that shift in perception allowed for God in, because every time you have a change in your life, that's an experience that gets through, that God come through. It's too bad that people feel that change is upsetting. Change is the way,
It opens the door.
It opens the door because your self-concept is rigid up until then. Then some change, like a family member dies, and it changes your whole life. And right at that change,
You have a chance.
you have the chance.
Yes, but it seems to me that what you aren't saying that's so important is that it's not the change, it's the meaning that you find in the change and your attitude towards the change. And that what you teach is being with that suffering, being with that grist for the mill, that really, in a conscious way?
Consciousness is upset by change. And in that upset it's a moment in your life which you hadn't planned for. And too often we are play acting a life which was designed by our minds. Ever since I saw that my life centered around suffering, I have made a concerted effort to make my life joyful.
And look at that smile.
But Huston, I'm curious whether there has been a teacher in your life who's had the power that Maharaji had in Ram Dass's life.
Yeah.
Did you, in your Christian upbringing or in your studies of Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism, have you ever met a teacher that you felt you had a very profound experience that changed your life?
My work, vocation, has been to plumb the 8, what I like to call the wisdom tradition, but only about their metaphysical, not their social and worldview. And so I've had distributive grace, and Ram Dass has had focal grace.
He was a son of a minister, and he's been steeped in the spiritual take of life. Then psychedelics, saw what it was all about.
Mm-hmm.
Very important.
My father's a railroad executive, and his father's a missionary. And you can feel the difference in our beings. So I needed psychedelics to find the spirit. Yeah.
Have psychedelics helped either of you learn about death, what happens in death? What have you learned?
I don't know if I know myself well enough. I don't think I have any fear of death, but I'm terribly afraid of what you've had to go through, and that is becoming dependent on others. That's my challenge that I still have to face. And with this, I'm having to have other people help me more.
What about you, Ram Dass? Did you have an experience either on psychedelics or some other way of death?
Well, when we did the Harvard experiments, Aldous Huxley was in our group. Mm-hmm. And Aldous brought us the book, the
Tibetan Book of the Dead? No.
the Tibetan Book of
Tibetan
the
Book
Dead.
of the Dead.
Yeah. I read the book on Tuesday, and I had just had a session, an LSD session on Saturday. And this book was describing that session. And yet the book was instructions to a person who was dying. Mm-hmm. the Buddhism said that you would go into the void. And people are frightened of that. But they get less frightened because they are given a soul, they're given a concept of them, of their individuality, which goes on after death. And it's very reassuring for people, even though it is short-term reassurance.
Recently, it had occurred to me that science itself cannot tell us anything directly about God, but the analogies are just wonderful. Mm-hmm. And the one that I have picked up on recently is that scientists tell us matter cannot be annihilated. It can change its state into energy, back into matter, but there's no way to stamp it out, get rid of it. Now, they're right, great analogy, but where they're wrong is they think the matter is fundamental.
Yeah.
Whereas, in fact, as we all know, and would be obvious, it was obvious to all the people of the world until this derailing by thinking that empiricism and science will do it. Consciousness is fundamental. So it cannot be annihilated either.
Could we just for a second define consciousness, both of you? I think it's really important. There's a lot.
After you, Alphonse.
Well, I'd like to hear both of you on this one.
He's a psychologist. He must know.
Well, I think instead of talking about consciousness, I can talk about awareness. The awareness, your and my awareness, is it's like a light that shines on what you're aware of. You're aware of your thoughts. You're aware of your feelings. You're aware of your skin. You're aware, etc. It goes. That is what consciousness is. Consciousness, I'm conscious of the fish. I'm conscious of the...
It's like the light shining on something.
I am the light. I am the light of consciousness shining on various things.
You know, it's really interesting because every spiritual tradition talks about light. Doesn't it, Huston? You know, doesn't light come into every tradition?
Light?
The concept of light.
Of course.
Yes. Is light God? What is light?
Let's
hear.
Consciousness is not a state. It is not a process. It is a substance. It's like, is the pane glass transparent, or is it coated over? Did the maid forget to dust it? There's dust, and then switch to a lamp with a candle inside and a shade around it. And in this well-known metaphor, the shade, the candle, the light is always there, but there can be dust on the shade, and then there can be dirt on the shade, so it's barely visible, this inner light.
Are you thinking about it, Ram Dass?
Yeah, sure.
Good.
I'm thinking about the
Delicious,
Good,
by
and
the
about
way.
the salad.
I think
I'm
That's
listening.
faith. When I look at my hope that that bomb will not fall, I don't know where that hope comes from in me. To live in hope is to living in the future, which is mind. But living in faith, that's right here. That's in the present moment. Holding on to your hopes doesn't keep you warm.
I have been helped on this point by, do you know the name Vaclav Havel, who some think is the greatest statesman of the 20th century for the way he negotiated that fission between the Czechs and the Slovaks without any violence. And they say that is magnificent. So when he stepped down from public office, this interviewer said, Mr. Havel, are you optimistic? And he said, no, I cannot say honestly that if I look realistically about this world, that I'm optimistic. And the reporter, expecting something else, sort of is taken back. And then Havel adds, however, I am hopeful. And the reporter said, what's the difference between optimism and hope? And Havel said, optimism turns on a prediction that into the future, that the future is going to turn out all right. And I've already said, I would not be honest if I said that I am confident that it will. Hope, he says, comes in from an entirely different direction, dimension. Hope is the conviction that if we face up to the problem that we're dealing with everything we have within us, that we will find that a meaningful act. And then he went on to say, let me give you an illustration. A loving family, a child severely autistic. Are they optimistic and thinking that he's going to be all right? If he's severely autistic, the answer is no. But that does not keep them, the family, from pouring all their love and nurturance of which they are capable of on that child. And I found that very inspiring.
Well, I think that's really important because do you believe that one path to God is a path of love? I mean, you've written a whole book about Islam and the Sufis, whose path is love.
Right.
So what about love as a spiritual path?
I think love between two beings is soul expression. Because for souls, the atmosphere, like our atmosphere is air, souls' atmosphere is love. And I've noticed in the work that I have done with the Zen hospice in death, a loved one has died. Their loved one didn't die to their love. It's the question of, does love transcend death? Because souls transcend death.
But also when you spoke of our individual's experience of love, if I love you, that it isn't just you I love, but that I'm experiencing my own opportunity to love.
To love.
I'm practicing
yes.
this little muscle called love.
I'm practicing my identity with soul. When I feel this love, I have gotten into my soul. Because, you get into the soul and it loves. It loves. So that when I hear ego-y loves, they got too entranced with the drama. But they missed the essential of the love. Yeah.
What have been the greatest epiphanies, the greatest revelations for you, or the one? Do you know what I mean? The really where you moved to a different attitude of life because you had a profound revelation or an epiphany?
Well, you're pretty persistent. I think, I go back to what I said earlier, that Ram Dass has dramatic changes he can report. And you have sort of indicated too. But I'm just like a banana slug. I
don't think so.
I just ooze through life. And this business about where am I in my journey? Am I making any progress? And taking one's spiritual pulse that way does not seem very profitable. What is profitable is this glorious moment we're in, taking it as it comes and doing what one can. And, Dag Hammarskjöld said it in beautiful prose towards the end of his life, I would not have missed any step on the path that I have traveled. To that?
Yeah, I agree.
You do?
Yeah. All of it. All the ups and downs, all of it allowed me to be here now. It was only but yet each segment many of the segments of my life have been the moment has been suffering, but now I can see that I would have been very changed now if it were for those moments. Like,
It seems to me that when you had a stroke, that it was as much of a transformative act as when you took psychedelics.
no, I wouldn't say
You
that.
wouldn't.
The psychedelics introduced me to God.
I see. But something happened when you had the stroke.
I came to the stroke. I came as a soul, not as an ego.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it was so meaningful to take the stroke as fierce grace, as a soul could do.
Well, it's a huge help to people to know that.
Because grace is given to souls. You don't get grace when you're busy being an ego.
What do you think? You know, one of the things I've been thinking about, because I'm getting older, is what it's useful to give the rest of my life to, and how to think about that. And I think, you know, that people everywhere are getting to live longer, right. And therefore we have time in a way that perhaps generations before us didn't, right. To think about what's the most useful thing to do with our last years. I think about it, so I assume you must.
Since I am a model for people, I would like to model their sunset image of contemplation. And it seems to me that the age stage has so much richness because it involves change in what my body can do, changes the cast of characters because they die off all the time. It's wonderful grist for the mill of awakening.
Awareness.
It would be healthy for our doing society would figure out that being is important, and they would do a life, and then being for the elder years.
Which is the tradition in every old indigenous society or
That's
Eastern
right.
society.
That's right. And I think if you and I can be so that other people can take care of my body, take care of your body, and then you wouldn't have fear of dependency.
It's something to work on, and I'm making minuscule progress.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one. The dependency.
Well, we all like to work and to be active in our various ways, but I never again want to feel pressured. And I have been pressured, as you were, throughout life. Deadlines, things to do, and this, that, and the other. So I'm consciously drawing back and committing myself to fewer things. It used to be that if I had an appointment, a doctor or somebody for lunch, I would always, the last thing I would do would be to grab an off-print and stuff it in my pocket so that if I got there early, I would. Now I intentionally will not take a shred of paper, and I rather hope that they'll be a little late, certainly will not resent it, because as you did, I'm not sure you use these words, but you made the point very clear. The way to do is to be, and give that time just to being. Are you pressured, Bo?
Oh, I think we all are. What sort of came up for me as you were saying that was that, the world today, the whole attitude towards time has changed so much.
Yeah.
And when we think about the soul, when we think about spirituality, when we think about light,
Yeah.
we immediately think about time and how it feels in daily society that time has speeded up. But it hasn't, because I know that by meditating or something, you can stretch it out. So what happened to time? It's so interesting.
One of my mentors was Aldous Huxley. And I think his best book is a line from Shakespeare, "Time must have a stop." It's only Maya. It's only the moving finger of eternity, as, who was it, Plato or Plotinus said. And it's like the cinema reel that goes 3 hours long. How long?
Yeah.
It's all there in the projection room. It's all there simultaneously. And I came upon a student of mine, MIT. We recently reconnected. He quoted me. I didn't even remember, of course. And he said, you said there are two things that are only half real: language and this videotape that we are making
Projecting.
of our lives.
Yeah.
And I can't remember, my word, did I have enough sense way back then to say something as wise as that? Because when I heard them from him, I think that's true. They're not totally unreal, and we have to deal with language responsibly, what we say, and also with this videotape for me. But they're only half real.
That's good to know.
Half real. Half real.
I'm going to get you some real dessert. How about that?
She serves brilliantly, and I have faith in her cooking,
Right.
but I don't have
word.
hope.
Oh, there isn't any hope for my cooking. There's
Hey.
just hope you'll keep eating it.